Hello friends, I'm George, the nice smelling gentleman. Welcome back to the channel guys, I hope that all of you are doing well. It's time for your daily dose of some fragrance content, and today I'll be talking about good affordable Middle Eastern fragrances that are underrated in my opinion. And I'm going to show you 8 such fragrances today. My first suggestion in today's video comes from the brand of Ard Al Zaafaran and it's called Tafakhar. And this is a very underrated scent in my opinion from the brand of Ard Al Zaafaran. This thing feels like it's been heavily inspired by Parfum de Marly's Carlisle, but that's only in the opening. In the opening is where this feels the closest to the original scent from PDM. It opens up sweet, boozy, with some fruity sweetness. There's an apple note in here. You get the vanillic and ambery sweetness, just like with the original fragrance. You get the strong boozy vibe, you get the spices. And in the opening this feels very similar to Carlisle, but that's where the similarities end basically, because on the dry down this fragrance goes into its own direction. It lacks the complexity and the depth of the original fragrance, which is to be expected because this costs more than 10 times less compared to the original fragrance itself. Here in Europe you can find this for like 15-20 euros. On the dry down it still remains sweet, but it becomes more woody compared to the original fragrance. There's a rose note in here. All around actually it's done very nicely, especially again considering how cheap of a fragrance this is. Performance is good, projection is good, and I think this is a fragrance that deserves more attention. My next suggestion comes from the brand of Lattafa and it's called Ishq al Silver. This is part of the original Pride line from Lattafa, and this is another fragrance that feels very heavily inspired by an original, in this case designer fragrance that comes from the brand of Paco Rabanne, and the original one is called 1 Million Lucky, and Ishq al Silver feels very similar to 1 Million Lucky. To my nose feels like a slightly fresher take on the 1 Million Lucky scent, but other than that feels quite similar. Now one thing I don't like about this fragrance is the craftsmanship, because the color that sits around the spray itself gets stuck to the actual cap, which is the cap is metallic. Other than that it's done, the quality here is decent on the bottle itself and the scent itself. Performance is good, projection is good, can be a bit hard to find, but another good thing about this one, apart from the fact that it's very affordable, is the fact that this is a very versatile fragrance that can be worn pretty much all year round. My next suggestion comes from the brand of Armaf and it's called Signature Night. Now this is one of those very underrated and less known fragrances from the brand of Armaf, and it's a real shame because I like this one a lot. You get a magnetic cap with this fragrance, although the magnets are not very strong, but still, getting a magnetic cap is always a nice touch. And the fragrance itself in here is quite a bit similar to Bulgari's Men in Black. Now doesn't feel like a straight up clone, this feels like a fresher take on the original scent itself, but I really like the original, and Signature Night from Armaf actually does an interesting job trying to freshen up the original scent itself. Feels again less deep, feels less sweet and dark compared to the original scent. This feels fresher, this feels lighter, just like an EDT flanker to the original scent itself, but nonetheless it's actually a very nice and very underrated fragrance from the brand of Armaf. The next one that I'm going to feature in today's video comes from the brand of Grandeur, which is a brand that's not very well known, at least currently, although they're starting to put out more and more fragrances. And the fragrance itself is called L'Ambre. Now this is a relatively new release from Grandeur. I recently got this into my collection, probably about a month and a half or so, and this one is a fragrance that's very heavily inspired by Bulgari's Tiger, and actually is done quite nicely. Maybe feels just a touch bit sweeter compared to Tiger itself, but if you're not familiar with the original scent from Bulgari, it's this very masculine, very easy to wear mix of some citrusy freshness. You get a grapefruit note which feels quite sweet, you get some ambery sweetness, you get some spices. On the dry down this becomes woody, just like the original scent. It's musky. It's a very masculine fragrance that again is super easy to wear, works all year round, it's super versatile, and just has a hint of a sort of a classical vibe, a slight old school vibe to it, but again very masculine and very easy to wear. L'Ambre has very decent performance, very decent projection, and can be found for a very cheap price. My next two suggestions will come from the brand of Paris Corner. Now Paris Corner is an interesting brand from the Middle East. It's a little bit underrated in my opinion, and I cannot deny the fact that sometimes some of their clones and their fragrances can be a bit hit or miss, but some of the other fragrances that they produce are really nice. And today I'm going to feature two fragrances that I find to be really nicely done. The first one is part of the autobiography line and it's called Supreme Gold. And this fragrance is heavily inspired by Parfum de Marly's Herod. I really like the original fragrance, and Paris Corner have done a good job with Supreme Gold. You get this very tobacco-y scent, just like the original fragrance has, that has a lot of vanillic sweetness. You get a bit of incense, some spices, some ouds. It's done nicely. The quality here is actually a very good. And this is a great unisex fragrance that leans to the masculine side, and it's great for cold weather usage. Has good performance, projection is a little bit on the lower side, but the original fragrance is pretty much the same. And comes in a high quality bottle that feels really nice in hand. All around a very nice job from the brand of Paris Corner, Supreme Gold. And my second suggestion from the brand of Paris Corner is part of their North Stock line, which is a little bit more higher end up and is a little bit more expensive. So this is not like super affordable, but still it's way cheaper compared to the original scent that it's being inspired by. The fragrance itself is called Dew, and comes in this very nice looking bottle, and this is heavily inspired by Parfum de Marly's Layton, and in my opinion this is one of the better Layton clones that you can get. Very underrated when it comes to Layton clones. Quality here is superb, performance is superb, projection is superb, all around very good fragrance. It feels like a slight twist on the original scent of Layton. This feels slightly more spicy, slightly greener. The geranium note in here is a little bit ramped up compared to Layton itself, but that lasts for a few minutes, and when this goes into its mid and late dry downs, becomes very similar to Layton itself. Maybe still lacks a bit of the sweetness of Layton, but all around smells very similar, and it's a very good. Again, probably the most underrated clones, or one of the most underrated Layton clones, which at the same time is superb. Dew from the North Stock and Paris Corner. And I'm going to finish off this video with two suggestions from the brand of Fragrance World. The first one is called Bavaria Intense, and this is very similar to the Armaf fragrance that I showed you a few minutes ago. Again, this being a clone of Bulgari's Men in Black, and this feels like a straight up clone rather than a fresh twist that the signature night feels. The atomizer is a little bit on the weaker side, but this is a good fragrance. I really like. I like the original fragrance, and again, Bavaria Intense feels like a straight up clone. This feels a little bit more spicy compared to the original scent, just lacks a bit of the intensity and the sweetness in the opening. On the dry down, actually becomes very close to to the Bulgari fragrance. Again, on the dry down, just lacks a bit of the sweetness, but still feels very similar, especially in the air. Keep in mind though that this is one of those fragrances that needed some more time to macerate before actually becoming as close as it feels nowadays to the original scent. Performance is above average, projection is above average, and it's pretty cheap when it comes to the price. And the last fragrance featured today comes from the Posh line and from Fragrance World, and it's called Posh Omega. And this fragrance is very heavily inspired by a great designer gem that unfortunately has been discontinued. The original is called Essence de Parfum, comes from the house of Jean-Paul Gaultier, and this is a very nice clone of that original scent. The original was this very sexy mix of some spices, cinnamon and cardamom, some lavender, which gives a bit of freshness and aromatic feel to the whole scent. Has a bit of leather, has some sweetness on the dry down, some vanillic sweetness, some tonka bean sweetness, feels a bit powdery. Very nice and underrated fragrance, the original one. And Posh Omega is actually very similar to that original scent, and it's very underrated. in my opinion. I really love this very unique scent profile that the original, both the original and Posh Omega carry. Affordable price tag, you know, good performance and projection, and all around a great scent from both the original one and from Fragrance World. And so guys, there they are, 8 very good affordable Middle Eastern fragrances that are underrated in my opinion. I hope that you found this video interesting to watch. If you did, give it a like, and I also hope that you're going to join me tomorrow for your daily dose of some fragrance content. And until then, stay safe and bye bye.